Okay, super. Okay, so like I said, tonight we are going to start Argument FRQ. That is our plan. So the FRQ that I have picked out is an Argument FRQ in which the respondent, you guys, would be arguing either in favor or in opposition to replacing the Electoral College with a direct popular vote. So before we go any farther with that, I think it's important to review what the Electoral College is. And the Electoral College is, again, it's the method through which we elect the president. Okay. Again, the way the Electoral College works is that every state's given a point value. That electoral value is based on the number of people that live in that state. So like North Dakota, we are worth 3 electoral votes. Because why?
Our population.
Right, our population, we have 2 members of the Senate and we have 1 member of the House. So therefore, 2 + 1 = 3. Okay. Getting a drink of water here really quick. Hopefully that'll help. All right. So again, North Dakota, small, excuse me, sorry, small population. And so we have an electoral value of 3. Again, it's equal to the number of people that we send to Congress. Okay. So every 4th November, the United States votes. The states basically direct the Electoral College how they want them to vote. How many electoral votes does a candidate need to receive to become president? Do you remember?
270.
Correct, right? There's 538 total electoral votes that exist. And so to become president, you have to win 270 of those. You have to win the majority. If the majority is won, then the House of Representatives decides who becomes president. Okay. Biggest gripes against the use of the Electoral College is that a person can receive more total popular votes, but still lose the election. Most recently happened in 2016 with Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. Hillary Clinton, in fact, did have, she did have, in fact, about 3 million more votes than Donald Trump did. Okay, 3 million more people voted yes for Hillary. But because we do not use the popular election to determine who our president is, she lost. And now former President Trump won more states, and therefore he won the presidency. He had, I forget how many electorals it was, but it was over that 270 threshold. Okay, so looking at our prompt tonight, and we probably won't get all the way through this, and that's okay. Again, and I'm going to go as long as my voice lets me. Excuse me. Tonight we're deciding, take a position on whether the Constitution should be amended to abolish the Electoral College and replace it with a direct popular vote. Again, the presidency is the only governmental office in the United States that's voted on that does not use the popular vote as its indicator. Every other office, Congress, every state office that's elected uses a popular vote. Okay, president is the only one that does not. Okay. So to start our argument, and I have my document open. To start our argument, we always start with a thesis, right? And the thesis is where we take a stance. What word do we have to use in our thesis? It's an absolute must. What word?
Is it because?
It is because. Your thesis must include the word because. Okay. So let's look at this. Take a position on whether the Constitution should be amended to abolish the Electoral College and replace it with a direct popular vote, which, by the way, that's what it would take because the Electoral College is outlined in the Constitution. So if we were going to replace this, it would take an amendment. Okay. So our thesis, this is where we take a clear stance. And use the word. All right, you two. You can see my screen. You can see the evidence because we have to use one of these pieces as evidence. How should we argue? Should we review what these three things are? Article 5 of the Constitution is the part of the Constitution that discusses the amendment process. Okay. Again, to amend the Constitution, it takes a 2/3 vote of both houses of the Congress. And what ratio of the states?
Is it 2/3?
It's not more. More than 2/3. It is equal to 75%.
3/4 then, I guess.
Or yep, 3/4. So you have to have 2/3 of both houses and 3/4 of all states. Okay. So it's a huge thing. Brutus won. We know that Brutus is against the Constitution in general for a variety of reasons. And then Federalist 10 is all about what?
Fed 10's the one where it basically says that people are too stupid to vote for themselves, right?
No, not necessarily. Fed 10 is about mean girls. Fed 10's about factions and how we can't destroy factions because people are not romantically necessarily, but people are attracted to those who have similar viewpoints and similarities to them. Okay. So, what I encourage you to do is whether you have a strong opinion on this matter or not, if you're like, yeah, it should be replaced, okay, that's fine. You have to use one of these pieces of evidence in your FRQ. Okay. This is evidence reasoning one. You have to use one of them. You're required to. And so I encourage you is that to look at the prompt and decide what is going to be the easiest route for me to argue this. Should we argue to replace or to abolish is the word we want to use? Or should we argue that it shouldn't be? Tell me how you guys want to argue and we'll argue it that way. And I'm comfortable arguing it either way based on what we're given.
Let's say argue against the amendment.
Argue against it. So say that the electoral college should not be abolished.
Yeah,
Is
that we should keep yeah.
keep
Be
the
against the
okay.
amendment.
All right, cool. We can argue it that way. So how I would write my thesis then, and this is the very first thing, right? And again, in your FRQ, when you write it, I encourage you to underline, highlight something. You won't have a highlighter, so maybe underline it. Underline your position and the word because. All right. Now, this is where we have to establish a line of reasoning. Okay. So we have already taken a stance. We are responding directly to the prompt. I am using their same words. We're just saying that the Constitution should not be amended to abolish the Electoral College and replaced with a direct popular vote. Why do we feel that way? I can give a good line of reasoning, but I'm not the one taking the AP exam in 2 weeks or whatever it is. And if you're totally lost, that's okay too. Like, that's why we're reviewing. I'll give you the argument that I would pose. Because boom. Thesis with reasoning. The Constitution should not be amended to abolish the Electoral College and replaced with the direct popular vote because the Electoral College has been used to elect the president since ratification of the Constitution 230 plus years ago. The Electoral College is a time-tested system of electing our nation's executive, and it provides insight to how the nation as a whole feels who should be the executive leader of our country. Okay. And now we're going to tie this back because everything has to be tied back to the thesis. And so you always start the argument with your thesis statement. Okay. So every argument we make from here on back goes back to our thesis. Okay. Electoral college has been used for a long time, and it gives an insight into how our nation as a whole feels about who the executive leader should be. Now, here's my biggest gripe about the popular vote. Okay. If we use simply a popular vote to elect our nation's president, would the votes in North Dakota really matter?
No.
Probably not, right? Because it's going to be the dominant metropolitan areas, the big ones. Like, those votes are going to dictate it more times than not, right? The big pockets of population. And I know we looked at it in class, but if you're ever cray on the internet, I would go, excuse me. No, Austin, I promise I'm fine. I'm healthy as a horse. Um, I would encourage you to look at a breakdown of how every county in the United States has voted the past several elections. Okay. And tell me if you see more red or blue on that map. Now, I'm not saying that that means I'm Republican or Democrat or one way or the other, but I'm going to tell you that if you do that, the past few presidential elections, overwhelmingly, you will see more red on the maps than you see blue. It's a fact. Okay. Now, which of these documents should we start with evidence one? based on this because we're saying nation as a which of these are concerned about the nation as a whole? So we have to use one of them.
The Constitution.
You know, we could. I was kind of leaning Brutus
I can't
1.
remember what Article 5 is, but wasn't Brutus 1 against the Constitution entirely?
He was against the Constitution, but he argued that the states should have more say in general. But we can use Article 5. Let's use Article 5. That's cool. Okay. Let's use Article 5. All right. So here we go. Evidence 1. We're using Article 5. Okay. So we already laid out our evidence. Article 5. We stated what Article 5 does. Okay. So underline your evidence so they know that you're using the document. And now we have to tie it back to our thesis. So the part of the thesis I would tie this back to is time tested. Okay. There you go. I go back to my thesis. I use time tested. I bring into the idea that our constitution's only been amended so many times. Okay. And yeah, you can go back, you can read that on your own later. Okay. Let's start on evidence 2 and see if we run out of time. So again, evidence 2, it can be one of these other documents, or it can be any other foundational document, or knowledge of course concepts, but it does not have to be from this list. So what should we use for evidence 2? What would be in favor of the Electoral College?
Fed 10 would be
Fed 10.
like when would
Yeah.
that be against it or for, could you argue if it'd be against it or for if it's
I
talking about factions?
yeah, I mean, I would argue that Fed 10 could be used here. I would argue Fed 70. Um, heck, I might even use Article 2 of the Constitution that talks about the Electoral College. So you tell me how you want me to argue it that way. What should we use? Should we use Fed 10 just because it's on the list?
You only have on these FRQs, you only have to use one that's on the list.
Correct. So if you can see my screen, correct?
Yep, I can.
Okay. So it's going to look very similar to this prompt for us. It's going to say one piece of evidence must come from the foundational documents listed above. So yes, one of these three. And a second piece can come from any other document, foundational document, not used as your first piece. So I can't use Article 5 twice. Or it can come from your knowledge of course concepts.
So then you said Fed 70, that'd be is that the one that I was
Yeah.
thinking of earlier?
Fed 7, Fed 70 was written by Hamilton, right? Energy and Enthusiasm, one executive. Um, Now we can use another document from this list, okay? But we cannot use Article 5 again. So if you want to use Brutus 1 or Fed 10, we certainly could. Like that's not, you're not going to lose points for that.
I'd say let's just do Fed 10 then.
Okay, let's do Fed 10. Sure. Okay. And I want to use the same wording they do. Well, let's see. Okay. So there you go. You can read that. And that's typed on the fly, just so you know, like this was not pre-typed. You guys can hear me typing. So we have our thesis. We have, and again, your FRQ will look just like this. Thesis, evidence 1, evidence 2. Both of these tie back to our thesis statement. Okay. We use reasoning. Okay. And then our last part of this, and it's not in this prompt, but you're going to be asked to respond to the counter argument. And we'll save that for our next review on Sunday. Alrighty. Any questions? Anything? I'm going to stop the share.